Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The battle in Congress over the border wall is still ongoing, as you know, now into its third week. Large swaths of government remain shut down. Trash remains on the ground. The president says, though, he will not give in until he gets funding for a border wall. The president plans to address the country tomorrow night. Then he's going to travel to the Mexican border later this week to make his case. On the Democratic side, meanwhile, the battle lines remain exactly in place as they were last week. They can't allow a wall to be built under any circumstances. They've said so many times, mainly because of the risk it might actually secure the border. They can't say that out loud, needless to say, so they have other storylines. You know how those go. They argue that because walls have worked well for thousands of years, somehow they won't work now.
If we're talking about border security, the overwhelming number of undocumented people in the United States overstayed visas. They did not cross the border. The solution to that is not a concrete wall. This wall is no deterrent.
By proposing a 5th century solution in terms of this medieval border wall for a 21st century problem.
We don't think the wall is a good technology to do the objective.
Possible that's a coordinated talking point, just guessing. In case it doesn't work, here's another talking point. Walls are just immoral, whether they work or not.
The inference that you draw from the wall is that's the only way to do that. That actually is an immorality. It builds walls in people's minds about who should come here and the rest. It's a very sad thing.
I hate the wall. I think it's immoral. I think it's wasteful.
Are we a country that puts a wall between ourselves and an allied nation? A wall is an immoral symbol for our country.
Just in case you're keeping track on your morality chart at home, walls are moral, more than moral, in fact laudable when they're built in Jordan or Israel or Tunisia with American backing. When they're built here to protect our own population, they are immoral. Okay, that's argument number 2. Here's argument number 3, popular with cable news creations like Rick Wilson. Anybody who supports the wall is inbred.
The idea of a physical wall, Donald Trump loves selling this to his base. And again, these are people who are not sophisticated. They are not bright. They do not understand the complexities.
Okay, here we go again now with here we go with condescending to us in the Trump base. We're just about to
Steve, if the shoe fits, you've got to wear it, pal.
Yeah, it's complexity. It's kind of people who aren't Rick Wilson just wouldn't understand. They're not intellectuals like Rick Wilson. That's what he's telling you on CNN. Those are the arguments. What are the actual arguments for and against a wall? Well, we found someone who has had the difficult job of overseeing protection on the border. His name is Mark Morgan. He led the Border Patrol under President Obama. He does not stay for President Trump. He joins us tonight for his view on that. Mr. Morgan, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me.
So the idea that walls don't work, that seems like the most real of the arguments we just heard. Do they work?
Yes, they absolutely work. If you look in the past, you don't have to go too far back in history, that a bipartisan legislation that was passed, the Secure Fence Act.
Yes.
In 2006 and 2012, bipartisan legislation passed where they built the wall, or fence, or physical barrier, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's a wall. It works.
So I just want to be completely clear. I have no idea what your politics are. You worked for Obama. You did not work for Trump. So I don't know what that says. But just to be totally clear, we're having you on to talk about this in your capacity as someone who knows a lot about the subject. Is there a real argument against having a wall that you're aware of?
No, I don't. And if you look at the experts, you know, the other day, so both the president of the Border Patrol Council, Brandon Judd, as well as the president, they were actually, I was removed as the chief. And I'm here today to tell you.
You were removed as the chief by whom?
By the current administration. So
you were taken out of your job by Donald Trump, but
correct.
You're here to tell us that a wall makes sense anyway.
Correct.
Okay, just to be clear.
That's right. The president is right. The president of Border Patrol Council is right. The other day when they had the national press conference and they got up and they said the wall works, they're right. And it's not based on a personal, political ideology. That's based on historical data and facts that can be proven.
Huh. So why do you think people oppose it?
You know, that I think is a political point that they're trying to make. I personally, in my experience, and I was also, the FBI for 20 years. I was special in charge of the El Paso division right on the border.
Yes.
Tucker, I cannot think of a legitimate argument why anyone would not support the wall as part of a multi-layered border security issue.
Right. So is it frustrating to you as someone who's actually done this for a living and as far as I can tell is not political and obviously has no partisan reason for doing this, is it frustrating how little time we spent actually debating the question of a wall and instead we're debating Trump this, Trump that, but where's the conversation about the actual border? And ways to protect it.
Tucker, again, I think you're right on. We're too wrapped up in the style, the approach, the fact that it's coming from the current president rather than the substantive issues. If you look at the substantive issues, the strategy has never changed. From the gatekeeper strategy from years ago, it's about infrastructure, technology, and personnel. That strategy worked then, and it works now. It was approved with the Secure Fence Act in 2006 and 12, and it works now. I don't understand what's changed.
What do you make of the argument that anyone who thinks the border needs to be secured and there's a crisis, CNN literally put scare quotes around the word crisis today in a Chiron, is a bigot? What do you think of that?
Well, then you can call me that, because I believe in what the president is doing. When he says that this is a national security problem, he's absolutely correct. And that just doesn't come just from me. That comes from the professionals that have been doing this their entire adult lives, serving the country on the border, protecting the citizens. They're saying it works. Why aren't we listening to the experts and the people who do it every day? I don't understand that, Tucker.
I don't know why we haven't had you on earlier. That's the most compelling case I've seen for this wall. Mr. Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Well, we just alluded to it a minute ago, and you've heard it 1,000 times. So many, it's like background noise now. Walls are racist. They say it constantly. Could give you 1,000 examples. We'll just give you one. This is from MSNBC just over this past weekend.
This wall that the president wants is a monument to white nationalism. Anybody who agrees to give any money to this wall is foolish.
Well, that was editor of TheRoot.com, the political editor, Jason Johnson, but hundreds of different people could have said exactly the same thing and have, almost word for word. For the media, questioning the racism of Donald Trump's border wall is like questioning gravity. You'd have to be an idiot. It's an open and closed case. If you want a wall or any kind of secure border, you're some kind of white supremacist. What's interesting about this argument, and again you hear it everywhere, is how Orwellian it is. It's the opposite of the truth. Ask yourself, who exactly supports unrestricted low-wage immigration? Who benefits most? If you made a chart, let's be honest here, you'd have to put rich white people at the very top of the list of supporters. Our endless supply of new immigrants gives them, people in my neighborhood, access to much cheaper household help. Nannies, housekeepers, gardeners, whatever. And it makes the products they buy cheaper. Most of all, it makes them feel virtuous, like they're helping the employees who work for them achieve the American dream. If there's any group in America that supports having more than 20 million people here illegally, it's not our poor, it's people in our richest neighborhoods. Nobody else even comes close. So what's the flip side? Who gets hurt most by our new borderless country? Well, again, not a close call. It's African Americans. Here's Cornell economics professor Vernon Briggs, quote, "Because most illegal immigrants overwhelmingly seek work in the low-skilled labor market, and because the black American labor force is so disproportionately concentrated in the same low-wage sector, there's little doubt that there is significant overlap and competition for jobs in this sector of the labor market. Given the inordinately high unemployment rates for low-skilled black workers, it is obvious that the major loser in this competition are low-skilled black workers," end quote. In other words, and you already knew this, anyone who thought about it for a second does, low-wage immigration is costing African Americans jobs and money. Other studies have reached the same conclusion. Again, it's obviously true. And because it's obviously true, that's exactly why the people benefiting from the current status quo don't want to have this conversation. It's why they scream bigotry until you shut up. But we won't shut up, and instead we're going to talk to Peter Kirsanow. He's a lawyer and a U.S. Civil Rights Commissioner, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Kirsanow, thank you very much for coming on, as always. So it just seems to me that this line, border walls are racist, secure borders are racist, you don't like people who look differently from you if you're for it, you're white supremacist. I mean, this is the definition of propaganda given who is hurt by these policies.
Right. It may be an aspect of projection if you're going to give them the best opportunity to describe themselves and not ascribe to them racism or immorality, which they describe to anybody who wants a secure wall.
Right.
And you're exactly right. Professor Briggs testified before the Civil Rights Commission. We had a whole host of people testifying before the Civil Rights Commission. The one cohort, the one demographic in the United States of America most harmed, most palpably harmed by illegal immigration are black Americans. And politicians, open borders politicians know this. They know this because there have been numerous hearings before Congress on this. I've testified in a number of these hearings. George Borjas has testified in a number of these hearings. Stephen Camarada has testified, and we've presented all of this evidence, all of this data, that the pernicious effect of illegal immigration, of open borders, has had on black Americans in terms of employment. Nearly 1 million fewer blacks work today because of the competition from illegal immigration than otherwise would be the case if we had a secure border. And it also depresses wage rates by a tune of $1,800 a year. George Borjas estimates that the depressive effects of illegal immigration on wages is anywhere from $99 billion to $118 billion annually, cumulatively, but it has the most significant effect on the black community. And then you have the downstream effects from this economic effect, and that is you have higher crime rates and incarceration rates, lower marriageability rates because no one gets married when they're poor, and that has the worst effect on the black community, where you've got a 72% out-of-wedlock birth rate in the black community. But it goes even beyond that. If you take a look at crime rates in the black community, we know that in a number of places, and in fact it's the Obama administration's Justice Department that brought indictments and convictions on the basis of illegal immigrant crime gangs that specifically targeted black communities. These were prosecutions by the Obama Justice Department based on racial targeting. Compton used to be 90% black. It's now 30% black, and a large part of that is because of this targeting. Other communities have suffered the same thing. So if you ask yourself what's racist, I would like to ask members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It's their moniker. They purportedly have assigned this designation to themselves because they have a peculiar interest with respect to issues pertaining to the black community. Ask them about this. Instead, they've capitulated to the open borders crowd for political reasons, because an influx of immigration or illegal immigrants, they believe, secures them an electoral advantage, and they've thrown blacks under the bus in the process.
Why does, you mentioned what has happened to Compton, California. That's at very least an interesting story. I don't think I've ever read that in the Washington Post or the New York Times. Why?
Because it's contrary to the overriding political narrative, you know, the narrative that says the biggest malady afflicting America today in the era of Trump is white supremacy. Unfortunately, this has saliency only in elevated academic circles. In the real world, that is not true. What you're seeing on the ground is economic competition, you're seeing crime rates, you're seeing a whole host of things that happen to poor black folks and other Americans, and the elites apparently are either consciously oblivious to it or unconsciously oblivious to it. But a lot of politicians know precisely what's going on, yet they do nothing about it. And I know they know precisely what's going on because of the testimonies we've given, because of the data we've submitted, and they simply ignore it.
And if you talk about it, they call you names. Unbelievable. Peter Kirsanow, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tucker.
Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been in office a very short time, already making news with a push for a 70% tax rate. Details on that after the break. Well, newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been in D.C. for just a couple weeks, and she's already a prominent fixture here. In an interview last night with 60 Minutes, she called for big changes to this country, starting with raising taxes to as much as 70% on the wealthy. Here's part of it.
But once you get to like the tippy tops, on your $10 millionth dollar, sometimes you see tax rates as high as 60 or 70%. That doesn't mean all $10 million are taxed at an extremely high rate, but it means that as you climb up this ladder, you should be contributing more.
Well, Republican Congressman Steve Scalise of Louisiana criticized that proposal on Twitter and got the kind of abuse you would imagine, comments like, "Kick his cane." Scalise responded to that this morning on Fox Watch.
A lot of her followers started making some very inappropriate references and comments, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to have this debate here.
Yeah, and when you say
with you on the House floor.
Everybody knows you were shot, almost killed. Miraculous story that you weren't, thank goodness. And all of a sudden, these followers are saying they're going to snipe you. So you got threats. Did she call you, contact you in any way?
No, I haven't heard from her yet.
Lisa Booth follows this kind of stuff for us. She's an Independent Women's Voice Senior Fellow, and she joins us tonight. Lisa, thanks very much for coming on.
So thanks for having me.
So was there a backstory here? Had the two of them tangled before, Scalise and Ocasio-Cortez?
I don't think so, but you have to remember, too, this interview she did and her calls for increasing the marginal tax rates by 70% on those highest earners has got a lot of national attention, as you know. So we've had a lot of, and now she's got also publications asking, is this something we should do? I saw, reports by Vox. I think CBS ran a story. So now we have all these national outlets basically having this conversation, take her seriously, and realize the impact that she has. She has 2 million something followers on Twitter, and she is now, as a freshman member of Congress, 29 years old, started this national conversation. So Republicans should take her very seriously.
This is exactly what we're going to get if we don't get this moment under control. That is, I couldn't agree with you more. Are other Democrats starting to mimic what she's saying? Do you think she's having that effect already?
I think she will. I honestly do. And I think it's also important to remember, look, she represents New York's 14th congressional district. It's a D+29 district. She's here to stay. Unless she gets primaried from the left, she's not going to be beaten by the right. So she's probably going to be around for a while. But I also think what's important for Republicans is to take a step back and ask, she's essentially asking for this tax increase to solve a problem that's already being solved. So she wants this Green Deal in an effort to fight climate change, in an effort to reduce carbon emissions. We're doing that on our own. The United States is the leader in the world in reducing carbon emissions. We're doing that via natural gas, by market forces, by the private sector and innovation. And so she's asking to solve a problem that the United States is solving on its own through innovation in the private sector.
Somebody who's better start making that case, I would say, in public pretty fast.
Well,
you can sort of see where this is going. Yeah, I agree with you.
And one other thing, Tucker, as well, she's bemoaning corporations, but she wants to take this money, likely, from taxpayers. And what they're going to ultimately do is the same thing that President Obama did with the stimulus, companies like Solyndra. So she's going to continue to feed that corporate welfare and corporate greed, yet she bemoans corporations and corporate greed.
Yeah, I wonder where she is on Google. Interesting question. Lisa Booth, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Great
Tucker.
to see you. Well, the Ocasio-Cortez interview was interesting and lengthy. Unsurprisingly, she thinks the president is a racist. But she also accused him of inventing a fake crisis at our southern border. Here's part of it.
Do you believe President Trump is a racist?
Yeah, no question.
How can you say that?
When you look at the words that he uses, which are historic dog whistles of white supremacy, when you look at how he reacted to the Charlottesville incident, where neo-Nazis murdered a woman, versus how he manufactures crises like immigrants seeking legal refuge on our borders, it's night and day.
Ocasio-Cortez also defended making occasional flubs on factual matters. She accused her critics of having the wrong priorities there.
Criticisms of you is that your math is fuzzy. The Washington Post recently awarded you 4 Pinocchios.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
But being factually correct is important.
It's absolutely important. And whenever I make a mistake, I say, okay, this was clumsy. And then I restate what my point was.
Well, speaking of morally correct, author and columnist Mark Steyn joins us tonight. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Tucker.
What do you make of that interview?
Well, you know, I actually thought that last point gets to the heart of Democrat identity politics. If you are, the idea to be morally right over being factually correct, if you are going to talk about marginal tax rates, then characterizing it as the tippy tops is actually probably a cute way to sell confiscatory taxation to large numbers of people. The whole point about being a Democrat or a progressive or a socialist is you're nicer than everybody. You have views about minorities and poor people and all the rest of it. And it doesn't matter if they devastate the black family or they admit MS-13 gangs. It doesn't matter. You're essentially advertising your niceness. And the problem with a lot of Democrats is they're not obviously very nice. If you look at Chuck Schumer, for example, you know, he's like almost like a stereotypical shark. You can see him, you know, polishing his fin as he's talking to you. And the danger for Republicans is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually presents these moral issues in a very appealing way. I agree with Lisa on that.
So I mean, what's the response? I mean, I agree with you completely. I was with Lisa Booth. I think it's easy to make fun of her, and obviously I enjoy it. But, I mean, this could be the future. We'd be unwise to write it off as a fluke, wouldn't we?
Yes, I think so. I mean, she made a very interesting point. As a foreigner, I always find those 60 Minutes interviews horribly over-edited, so they approximate to no known rhythms of human speech. But she got in a couple of words. No, they are. I don't understand why.
You're totally right.
No, this thing's been on for 50 years, and I have no idea why they do it like that. But the point where she talked about, you know, education and healthcare. America spends more than other countries and gets worse results, you know, that's a conversation, that's a starting point a lot of people on the right would be willing to share with her. She wants to go in different directions. But her personal story, you know, her father got cancer and they died. So it's not just you get one lousy cancer and you lose your dad. She also lost her nice home in the suburbs, and her mother had to become a school bus driver. Those are things that ordinary people can relate to. That story is very common. And Republicans have to be careful. This is not Chuck Schumer. This is not Hillary Clinton. This is someone, and we should thank God, by the way, that you have to be older than 29 and a half to run for president, because otherwise the Democrats would have a completely different scale of threat.
Very smart. I agree with that completely. I agree with everything you say. Always. Mark Steyn, great to see you. Thank you.
Now, Tucker.
It's true.
Thanks a lot.
Kind of spooky. Well, we opened this year by calling for conservatives to focus on families above all, and that got a strong response. We'll talk to a critic of our proposal after the break. Opening show of the year, we talked about the central problem of American politics, which is that our leaders have lost sight of the point of being in charge. Their goal should be simple: strong American families. Anything that makes it harder to form strong families, they ought to be against. It's not complicated. Judging by the response we got, a lot of you agree with that. The piece resonated more than anything we've done in the last 2 years. In Washington, though, it wasn't very popular. One writer at National Review suggested we are peddling something called victimhood populism. That's missing the point. Populism is never the goal. It's the symptom. Populism is what you get when you blow off the country's problems for so long that voters feel they have to punish the people in charge to get their attention. Populism is a smoke alarm. Ignore it and the place burns down. On the left, meanwhile, the response was just as predictable. They screamed bigotry, which is always what they do when they don't want you to talk about something. In this case, they accused us of sexism. We dared to talk about the role of falling male wages in the destruction of the American family. That's not allowed. Okay. But let the record reflect that we're not the first ones to notice this phenomenon. There's at least one well-known politician who thought deeply about this more than a decade ago. In fact, wrote an entire book on the subject. See if you can guess who that was. All right, time's up. It was Elizabeth Warren. Back in 2003, Warren was still a Harvard professor. That year, she published a book written with her daughter entitled The Two Income Fathers Are Going Broke. The central thesis of the book was that the mass entry of mothers into the workforce has been a disaster for families, and most of all for women. Mothers who work have to spend far more time away from their kids, which for many isn't liberating so much as it's deeply sad. Comfortable position in the middle class. But the frenzied bidding wars fueled by families with two incomes changed the game for single-income families as well, pushing them down the economic ladder. To keep mom at home, the average single-income family must forfeit decent public schools and preschools, health insurance, and college degrees, leaving themselves and their children with a tenuous hold on middle-class dreams. Such pressures have taken these women out of the home and away from their children, and simultaneously made family life less, not more, financially secure. Today's middle-class mother is trapped. She can't afford to work, and she can't afford not to. End quote. Now, just to restate, this is not a press release from the Mennonites or a position paper for some Christian right think tank. This was written fairly recently by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, the same one, the hero to the left. Later in the book, and we read it, Warren lays out the long-term consequences of an economic system that requires both parents to work. More families go broke. This increases the rate of domestic abuse, divorce, and broken homes. Some people simply decide not to have children at all. And Warren's response to that is striking. Again, another quote from Elizabeth Warren. Many view parenthood as nothing more than another lifestyle choice, not so different from joining a commune or developing a passion for windsurfing. But it isn't true for society at large. What happens to a nation that rewards the childless and penalizes the parents? If middle-class men and women stop making that parental lifestyle choice, who will care for them in their old age? Who will pay taxes, build infrastructure, and keep the economy afloat? And most important, who will populate the great middle class of America's future? End quote. Again, and we can't say this enough, Elizabeth Warren wrote that. Not in 1936, but in 2003, the modern era. We had jet planes and frozen yogurt. Elizabeth Warren said that out loud. Nobody seemed to mind. She'd never say that today. It's not allowed, like so much else that is true and important. We'd love to talk to Warren about her book anytime. Obviously, she won't come on. She can't talk about the things that she believed 10 years ago.
just because you have to exercise reason and free will to produce human values. That's kind of a separate exercise. But if you take purpose, for example, which you talked about as a component of happiness, purpose is something that if it's going to make you happy, for you to pursue a purpose in life, it's something that you choose for yourself. I mean, imagine if the government gives you a list of approved purposes. Every market intervention, the ones that you were talking about in the intro here, you know, the regulations and the tax code and everything else, are little bits of force that the government exerts to keep people from making free choices. And a value requires that you choose it. You know, that's
well.
Really,
I mean,
I think the fundamental difference between
what you're saying is true. That all law, all regulation, all taxes, as I said in the intro to my question to you, encourage or discourage human behavior and therefore limit choice. That's their nature. Okay, that's never going to change. So as long as you have a government and you're raising money to run it through the tax code, why wouldn't you self-consciously?
But here's the thing. I don't necessarily think, I'm not an anarchist, but I don't think that a government, the existence of a government in the long term, you know, once a whole lot of people agree with my ideas, you know, Rand's ideas, once that happens, you don't have to have involuntary taxation, right? What we could do is we could have a pay-for-service sort of government, and, you know, there's proposals about how to do this, but it's so far down the road, it's very
but I wonder,
right
here's the...
But it doesn't depend on force,
I was a libertarian for many years, so I know the nature of the fantasy, but I'm wondering, let me just ask you this. You dislike socialism
like right now, yes.
You dislike socialism a lot, of course, and I don't think it works either. We're about to get it. That's very clear. We're going to get socialism. Ocasio-Cortez is famous for a reason, and we are acting like the Romanovs. Everything's fine, and that's the reason we're about to get this system that you hate. So wouldn't it be wiser to do what's necessary to bring these forces under control to help people so that we don't get socialism? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, so what you're saying is compromise by adding more government controls that you think are going to steer people towards making choices that are probably better for them, you know, in terms of raising good families and things like that. Is that what you have in mind?
I'm saying that any country, any government, as long as we're accepting the reality of government, and I think for the time being we can agree on that we have a government that produces a system in which healthy families are very hard to maintain is a failing system. So why wouldn't we just be real about that?
Here's the thing. So government should not be initiating force. All it should be doing is protecting people's ability to act on their own judgment and exercise their choices about how they best pursue their own happiness, living the good life. That's what it's about. Government cannot make people happy. No market system can make people happy. The iPhone cannot make someone
But it can
happy.
certainly make them very unhappy, and that's what I think our current system is doing. And I honestly think both of us will be lamenting the rise of some socialist lunatic very soon.
But also where we disagree, we disagree about that nature
We're
of value,
out of time.
but
I will
also,
give you the last word.
We don't. Okay, well, we don't have a free market right now, and that was the other point I was going to make. So not only do you and I disagree about value and choice, but we don't have a free market right now. The ills that you name are caused by government intervention.
Amy Peacock, always game for a good conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the people in charge are suddenly for weed. Is it because they're super cool? Or is there some other reason they might want a passive population? We're going to get some chips and think about it. Dude, we'll be right back. Momentum is building by the day to fully legalize marijuana nationally. 10 states have already done that. More restrictions fall away every election cycle. The federal government barely cares about fighting any of this. You hear less and less about the health risks of marijuana. Does that mean there are no risks? Well, only that many people have an interest in concealing them. Alex Berenson is a former New York Times reporter. He's a great novelist. Now he's the author of an unexpected new book called Tell Your Children, The Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. He joins us tonight. Mr. Berenson, thank you very much for coming on. I say unexpected because your bio gives no hint of the kind of person who would write this book, but you have. Why did you write it? What did you find?
Well, you can blame my wife because she's a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, and that means she deals with the criminally mentally ill. Yes. A couple of years ago, she said to me, you know, practically every case I see, people were using cannabis at the time they committed these terrible crimes. And I said to her, you know, that sounds like nonsense. That sounds like reefer madness. And she said, you know, maybe you should look at the studies instead of mansplaining me. And I did. And of course, you know, never argue with your wife. She was totally right. It turns out that there is a proven link between cannabis and psychosis. There's a very, very strong risk that if you smoke too much when you're in your teens, you're more likely to develop schizophrenia, which is really a devastating mental illness for people. Yeah, awful for not just for the people who suffer, but their families. It destroys families, and furthermore, there's a downstream link between psychosis and violence. So reefer madness basically is real, as a psychiatrist in Australia said to me.
Wait, do you know how let me just pause by noting how uncool you sound by saying that.
I know. You know what? I don't care. I have kids. I don't want them to get psychosis. I don't want them to get schizophrenia. I'm going to tell them the truth. And, the reason I wrote this book is so that parents, who have kids who might be using can read this and really understand what the science is. There's a lot of evidence that if you tell kids the truth about, drug use and about addiction and harms, they'll respond. And hopefully this book, can help with that.
Policymakers don't seem to have any idea about this, or maybe they don't care. What's your conclusion?
My sense is they don't have any idea that the legalization community has been very, very aggressive about yelling reefer madness at anybody who tries to bring this up, and that the science is complicated. And look, it took us 30 years to prove that cigarettes cause lung cancer, and along the way everybody said, oh, correlation does not equal causation. Well, guess what? Those people are saying, not those people, but there are people saying the same thing right now. Oh, you don't have the evidence. There is a huge amount of evidence, and the National Academy of Medicine basically made this point in 2017, and it was ignored. The elite media just really does not want to deal with the harms caused by cannabis.
You got a lot of guts to write something like that, given the world I'm sure you live in, and I admire that. No, I'm dead serious. It's a very unfashionable position for someone in your world and my world to have, and so I'm impressed that you wrote this. Thank you very much. Well, the left across the country is pushing to decriminalize marijuana, and not just that, but decriminalize many different kinds of crimes: loitering, shoplifting, theft, and tamp down enforcement on those that remain. Richard Goodstein is an attorney, former advisor to Hillary Clinton. He joins us tonight to explain why that's happening. So, Richard, I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but you have to think if you're running a country that really kind of shafts young people and makes it very hard for them to get married, have kids, even buy a car, maybe you'd want them to be spaced out and passive, even if more of them are going to get schizophrenia. Am I being too cynical in assuming that?
Are you including like the states of Utah?
Yeah, I am.
So okay, so all these red states that are going to So
politicians are all the same. They want the money. They don't care about the people.
I'm just curious. Are you discriminating between medical marijuana and recreational?
Of course I'm. Right. I'm sure that there are health benefits from medical marijuana. I'm sure there's a lot about marijuana we don't know, but we know that heavy recreational use, which becomes more common when you legalize it, there's no question of that, is really bad for people. So why are we pushing this?
Well, first of all, I don't think we should be pushing it, certainly on children. I mean, I take what Alex just said to be true, that we don't want our kids getting to become psychotic.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, the amount that people are going to be using is going to be used whether it's legal or not, and better, it should be regulated, we should be taxed, we should basically control what it is that they're ingesting, and frankly, figure out some way to have the free market take over.
Yeah, the free market. Okay, how are you on organ sales? No, since you're a free market guy now, and you're all about letting people do what they want with their own
bodies. Not just now. I've actually been a free market guy all along.
Then where are you on the poor selling their kidneys?
Yeah, I'm bad. I'm down with that.
Oh, you're down with that. You're okay with that.
No, look, the fact of the matter is, obviously, everything that he just said, that Alex just said, could be said about alcohol.
Yeah.
Why don't we tell our kids about the dangers of that too? And we absolutely should.
I agree, but
and yet somehow or other we've given up on that one. But somehow or other we're going to fight this on marijuana.
No,
don't get me wrong.
Just because one's bad doesn't mean the other's better or good or what. So you see Rahm Emanuel, who did really nothing to fix Chicago at all. The city's in worse shape than when he got there, and his final solution is, well, for Chicago, is we need more casino gambling and more weed to raise money for the bottomless pit that is our local government. That really sends a pretty clear message. I don't care at all about the people who live here. Yeah. I hate them. I'm trying to exploit them with more addictions.
Again, other politicians have encouraged gambling.
They have.
Republicans as well as Democrats.
And they should be
that's not a partisan issue. We can concede that.
Oh, I already said that at the outset.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just saying it's disgusting.
Right.
It's totally wrong, and nobody ever says that.
Yeah,
Why?
I agree. I don't think that gambling is a great positive influence on the country. And I think as far as weed is concerned, the fact of the matter is what he's trying to do is routinize it, as opposed to, frankly, let's just talk about the wall just for a second. If marijuana were legal, we would have less crime. We know that because these bad guys in Mexico would not have the incentive, and we've actually statistically seen that.
Let me just ask a final question, since I have the data on it. It sounds like you don't. Has legalized marijuana eliminated a black market of marijuana? And the answer is no, not at all.
Well, we actually know that by 78%, Border Patrol people seizures are down, and where it's up, marijuana is moving through the actual border, the entry sites, right? A wall's not going to stop.
Because Americans grow better marijuana than was ever grown in Mexico. That's the truth. It's grown indoors hydroponically. It's one of the great success stories of American agriculture. It's just really bad for you. That's the point. And politicians don't care because they don't care about the people who live here.
Maybe you and I can end on one thing. Can we agree that sort of research and data could actually contribute to this? Why not have it here? We have it, elsewhere. I think that would be good.
Look, I'm always for science. Right. Always.
Good.
Okay. Unlike the left, I believe in science. But all right, we'll continue.
Good.
Richard, thank you.
Of course.
Well, the president announced the other day that U.S. troops would be coming home from Syria, but it doesn't seem like they are. That withdrawal has been paused. And now the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, says that actually they're not coming home. Americans will only come home from Syria when Kurdish forces are safe from attack by Turkey. Now, Turkey is a NATO ally. And that means the U.S. is levying threats against our own ally in NATO. Remember that the next time you hear how crucial this alliance is. It's all very confusing, and that's why we're grateful to talk to Christian Whidden, a former State Department senior advisor in the Trump and Bush administrations. He joins us now. So I'm not here to attack the Kurds, Christian, but I'm all of a sudden hearing that the well-being of Kurdish forces is more important than getting our troops home. When did this become a critical national security imperative?
That's an excellent question, and I think Bolton may have actually been misquoted by the New York Times and the Washington Post.
So.
If you look at what he says just that Turkey ought to consult with us before they do something in the areas where the Kurds are. But there's definitely a large, unseen force here in Washington that wants mission creep. They want to go from the actual mission, which is killing ISIS, something I think we were all on board with. Yes. President Trump sold to the American people and succeeded on, to protecting the Kurds, essentially to creating another Kurdistan de facto state in Syria, just like the one we helped to create in Iraq.
But you've been here so long and you've worked in a bunch of governments, and so you know what's really happening. When the president comes out and says, we're bringing our troops home from Syria, everyone who lives here said, that's not going to happen. They're not going to let him do that. Are you joking? And so Bolton got out there and be like, well, actually, we're putting this on pause. It's according to script, actually. It's perfect.
Right, but I think at the end of the day, if you look at what Trump has said, he said we're getting out. And then there was all this talk about, that's not really what he meant. It's going to be 4 months or longer. And then he said, I don't know where 4 months came from. And then today, there's this other mission creep. And people also talking about, well, we may want to manage Syria's airspace or the airspace over the Kurds for a while, which is a long-time neoconservative dream to have a no-fly zone in Syria. That's a long-term commitment. Think about the one we had over Iraq. Went on for more than a decade. But the president actually criticized those two reports in the New York Times and the Washington Post. I hope he sticks to his word. I hope we get out. That will be very popular with voters, staying in and changing the plan.
Shouldn't someone, last question, go on TV at some point and explain to us why it's so important to protect the Kurds? I think most people, educated people even, have no idea who the Kurds are and why they should care. Why all of a sudden has Washington decided this is the most important thing we should do?
It's this sort of new form of imperialism we have. If you go back and look to the original European imperialism in the Middle East, Sykes and Picot, a British and French bureaucrats who basically carved up the Middle East after World War I into these unstable political entities that made no sense. I mean, that is sort of what is going on in Washington. You're right. This idea that just because we fought in part with the Kurds, having never made them a specific promise that we owe them their own de facto state, which is the implication here. Yeah. It's nuts. Never been put to the president, never been put to Congress.
Or the public. It's supposed to be a democracy. You should have some way of influencing your foreign policy if you're the citizenry, no?
Yep. It's the palace eunuchs think they know better than the emperor.
Great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you. Well, a young girl's murder in Houston described as a case of racial terrorism. What's the truth of that? We'll investigate it after the break. Well, the horrifying murder of 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes in Houston was briefly a rallying cry for activists across the country who said it was an unprovoked act of racial terrorism. Scared people. Now police have made an arrest, and that storyline is changing. Trace Gallagher has a lot more on that. Trace?
Good evening, Tucker. Even with zero evidence and no motive, the shooting death of 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes was labeled a hate crime by some. An attorney for the victim's family said he believed the murder was racially motivated because the nation is racially charged. Jasmine was in a car with her mom and 3 sisters on December 30th when a vehicle pulled alongside them and opened fire. The family reported seeing a red truck with a white driver in his 40s, a description that led to a sketch and this statement from Texas Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, quoting, "I believe, and having written hate crime legislation, knowing the criteria, I believe that this should be looked at as a hate crime." But 3 days later, New York-based social activist and writer Sean King got a tip that the suspect was a 20-year-old black man named Eric Black. King gave the tip to Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, and Eric Black was later arrested and reportedly admitted driving the car, saying his passenger was the shooter. The potential second suspect is currently being held on drug charges. But critics point out that Sean King and Sheriff Gonzalez continued tweeting and promoting the white suspect narrative even after the credible tip. And Congresswoman Jackson Lee maintains that her hate crime statement was just fine. Watch.
Absolutely not. Nothing is irresponsible when it comes to the loss of a precious 7 or 8-year-old.
Investigators say Jasmine's death appears to be a case of mistaken identity. Tucker.
These people are so irresponsible. It's unbelievable. Trace Gallagher, thank you for that clear-headed report. I appreciate it. That is it for us tonight, sadly. We could go on forever. We'll be back tomorrow, 8 p.m., the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and especially groupthink, which is everywhere. Resist it with all your might. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity, live from New York City right now.